This session is the follow-up session to yesterday's meeting on collaborative tools. And in this session, we're specifically going to talk about the collaborative tools that meet.coop are delivering, which is this service you see here, big blue button, which we're all talking on and conversing over, which so far has been working really well. And we're really pleased by the collaboration that has made this possible. So we have several of the people here who've been behind delivering Big Blue Button for us. And we also have some experts who have some interesting views on governance for systems like this. And this is something that we feel still needs to be defined for meet.coop. So this is an amazing opportunity to draw on the experience of the panel and everybody else in this conference in order to try and determine a sensible way to govern meet.coop as we go forwards, to make sure that it meets our needs, is a well-managed and stewarded entity, and that we build on the lessons from other organizations, because governance is really not easy, and it is obviously related to the kind of business model which is chosen. So we have So Jung Rim, who's from the Social Innovation Exchange, who is going to help chair the session, along with Mike. We have Alfredo Lopez from the May 1st movement, and Francesca Pick from Greater Than and Inspiral, Peter Yolson, who's from Collective Tools and DigiDem Lab, and hopefully we will get Albert Tucker joining us at some point during the session. There he is. Without further ado, I shall pass you over to Mike, who will give us a short introduction.
Thanks, Holly. Thank you. The framing of all of this is in terms of contributions in the commons. So let me talk about the model of what a commons is. A commons is a relationship between some people, a community, and some stuff. The stuff is basic necessary means of subsistence and well-being. It's stuff that really matters, and it's that relationship between the community and the resources, the means of subsistence, which makes it a commons. And the people are commoners. There are three constitutive dynamics, three constitutive kinds of contribution that make a commons. One is what I'm calling curating, but this includes making, it includes producing, provisioning, nurturing, harvesting, cultivating. It's what gets the resources to be the resources that they are. Second relationship I'm calling enjoying. This is enjoying the benefits of the commons, but it's a nice old-fashioned word. You enjoy the privileges of the commons. In enjoying the commons, you mobilize the resources, you weave them together into the fabric of life. You handle them in a vernacular way as part of everyday living. You consciously value them and appreciate them. You celebrate them. You live and breathe the commons. This is a very important, kind of aesthetic dimension of what a commons is. This, though, is the pivot, stewarding. And I'm using that good old English word, the idea of stewardship, the idea that you have responsibility for something. It matters that it should stay in a good form. It matters that it should be handed on in good shape. And it's stewarding that makes a commons. If resources are not stewarded, then they're not a commons. So having sketched that outline, I'm now going to sketch 4 models of governance that we could bring to bear on a commons of digital means. These characterizations may be a little bit provocative. They may seem a bit like caricatures, because these are really complex things that I'm trying to refer to. I don't mean them to be caricatures. I do believe that they're all real, and they all have kind of strong cultures and strong traditions behind them. So if they seem like caricatures, it's just because of the brevity here. So the first model of governance, this is the resident one. If we're talking about digital means, this is the resident model of governance. It's the classic free Libre open source software model, the FLOSS model. What you have here, it pivots around these people here who, the hackers, the code geeks, the devs, the people who create the code, and they do live in a free Libre Commons. I think it's quite true to say that the world of free software is a commons. This value of free Libre production, peer-to-peer production, is central in this. What happens currently at the moment is that the things that they produce, which we might regard as tools, are basically put in some kind of storefront. And, it might even be seen as like a food bank. All of these platforms where the free tools live. So like Disroot, like Ferapps. What happens then is that those resources, they leave the commons. They leave the commons of peer-to-peer free software production and use, and they come out here to us who who wish to enjoy them as means of our own practice. We're no longer in the commons. I mean, basically, what we're doing here is what's called free beer rather than free Libre. This is stuff, it doesn't cost us anything. It's sitting there. We can walk around all of these platforms, use any of these tools that we like at any time that we like. But this is not a commons. In commons parlance, this is an unregulated common pool. It's not a commons. So whatever governance there is, or whatever commons there is here, it doesn't include all of this. So that's the first kind of the model that we need to consider, because, as I say, it really is the resident model in the sphere of digital resources. So the next model that I'm going to bring up is a kind of a classic consumer co-op model. The central thing in a consumer co-op is here in the center, what I've called stewarding. The governance is central in the idea of a co-op. Governance usually talked about in terms of democracy, and in a co-op, this takes the form of a frame of ownership, and ownership of a share in the co-op then gives voting rights to the ownership of shares, and a whole system of meetings and voting and so on. And that whole system of democratic practice, according to that standard kind of model, constitutes the mode of governance in a classic co-op. And so, rather than stewarding, I guess that democracy or governance in its usual general sense is what applies in a co-op environment. In a consumer co-op, this business, the making of what goes in to the commons, the making of what goes into the what the co-op distributes, isn't generally considered. That's a producer co-op, and there is this tension in the co-op world, historically a tension between producer co-ops and consumer co-ops. So, as distinct from the peer-to-peer model that we just looked at, the curating of the stuff here isn't really part of the business of the co-op or the classic consumer co-op. So it's very different from peer-to-peer in that respect. Another thing about this model is that, again, if we're members of a co-op, our roles as purchasers, users, consumers of the products of that consumer co-op isn't the same as our role as governors, as voters in the co-op. There is this institutional kind of separation or split between the roles, and it's perfectly possible to be a member of a co-op, as I am with the wholesale co-ops in England, and be in this role, and really not to exercise this role at all. I'm a passive member of these consumer co-ops. One of the things that we do need to probably give a lot of status when we talk about the co-op model is this idea of the multi-stakeholder co-op. A multi-stakeholder co-op, in principle, establishes a relationship between the enjoying of what might be in a commons, the producing of what might be in commons, and the governance, the stewardship of the commons. So this model of multi-stakeholder co-op, I think, is particularly important. It's not the most widespread. It's difficult. I'm not sure that anybody feels that they're a master of this mode of governance in co-ops. So I guess my feeling about this is that it's leading edge, might even be bleeding edge. So I think if we're talking co-op governance, I guess we have to be talking multi-stakeholder. Next, the third model, it's a model from a grassroots movement organization model. And I guess I just need to take a little sidestep here. What I have in mind with this slide is a fairly traditional kind of movement organization. What we heard earlier in terms of Esther Foreman, talking about social change agency, was clearly a movement organization, and it clearly of a rather evolved and different kind than this classic one. So it just illustrates the fact that there are more models than these formalized ones that I'm using here today. I have here an idea of a movement organization which is built around the idea of being a grassroots movement. Uh, some idea of grassroots resistance, currently the resistance to austerity, the resistance to the consequences of the financial crisis, resistance to the consequences that we're all bearing for environmental degradation and so on. And the part of this grassroots ethos is the principle of hands-on making of society, the hands-on making of culture, the hands-on making of the economy. It's done directly. It's the direct production of society, which is one of the strong foundations of grassroots movements. Uh, Also, depending on the movement, we should assume that there's some kind of expectation of dual power. Uh, And so, this idea of civil power, I'm taking to be an essential part of a grassroots movement. And so, governance, in some sense, power, in some sense, is fundamental to this model. It does seem to me, though, that traditionally this kind of organisation is political rather than economic. So this idea of civil power, the idea of citizens' assemblies, the ideas of other forms of democratic organisation is kind of constitutive of this kind of movement practice. And so it's not clear to me that stewarding has any particular prominence in this kind of movement. And in fact, what I observe in some of the organisations today that are talking about dual power in a solidarity economy kind of setting is that there's this focus. I think it's very traditional focus in this kind of movement on assemblies. So we have this idea of systems of assemblies, and assemblies are democratic assemblies, they're autonomous assemblies. But I do sometimes see a tendency for people to focus on the machinery of assemblies, as distinct from the practice of living in communities and the provision of means of subsistence. This form of governance is powerful and important, but I'm not sure that it works very well as a form of economic organisation, as distinct from political organisation. The caveat that I'll put on that is here that there's a strong emphasis in this tradition on the autonomy of the local. And I think within that sense of local autonomy, there is this deep faith in the creativity, the productive capability of ordinary people organising in their own area on the ground. So, I think that the economics of this model is tacit in the idea of the autonomy of ordinary people organising from the roots. But anyway, it's a model, and historically it's an important model to be working with. Finally, then, this is the way that I want to represent a full-fledged commons mode. As I said earlier, stewarding is at the heart of commoning. If it's not being stewarded, then it's not a commons. I've got enjoying here characterized as care work, which is the weaving together in everyday life of things in an intimate kind of a way. It's taking care that things actually mesh, that they actually fit, that needs actually being met, that people's contributions are actually being recognized, and this very fine-grained articulation work that sometimes these days been characterized as care work. And similarly, the care work of production, of making sure that the right things in the right places, in the right forms, at the right times. So this ethos of care work, fine, hands-on, very fine-grained, working with the materials of society, with the materials of culture, with the means of subsistence, is an essential part of the commons mode. One of the things that makes this really quite different than any of the modes that I've referred to so far is this one. It's to focus on time. It's to focus on legacy. It's to focus on the future. It's to focus on maintaining what's good and what's necessary in order that it should be good and necessary for the people who come next. So this focus on the grandchildren's grandchildren uh, is brought right up to the front in commoning in a way that I don't think any of the other traditions or forms really gives it full grounding at all. We're talking about long term, we talk about the species, we're talking about the planet, we're talking about the common environment of all peoples. Uh, and even though that kind of value is found in the labour movement, it is found as one of the roots of the cooperative movement, I think we've got to look to commons movements to really find that with the prominence that I think today that we need to have it. Okay, I mean that's as much as I want to say in terms of outlining models. Let me just say that I'm not proposing a typology here. You know, I'm really flattening out some extremely complex kinds of institutions and culture and practice in society. But I do believe that these are real traditions. I do believe that these are really different modes. You know, these are not the same. A commons is not a co-op. Is not a commons automatically. You can't say, oh, we'll sort things out because we're a co-op. And I'm sorry, with all respect, that doesn't deal with the issues that commoning deals with. So I suspect that we need some kind of new hybrid here. I think that what we need to deal with the world in terms of commons, and what we need specifically to deal with digital materials, digital resources as commons, it's not on the table yet. I think it has to be made. And maybe these are some of the components that we may use in making. So can I pass over to you to bring the panel in?
Great. Thank you, Mike, for setting different modes. My name is So, everyone, and I met Mike through kind of a Robin Murray reading group last or 2 years ago. And I'm really interested, I'm from South Korea originally, and I'm really interested in kind of how co-op models can be kind of what kind of models we can learn from different countries and how it kind of transfers across cultures and contexts. And today I have a very lovely role of introducing the contributors who will come in and show kind of the inspirational kind of to show kind of diversity of governance in movements and organizations who are building these infrastructures for new economy. So the format will be kind of 5-minute inspiration from Fredo, Francesca, Peter, and Albert, followed by a response from Wouter. So the order will be Alfredo, Francesca, Peter, and Albert. So I would like to introduce Alfredo from Movement Technology. Alfredo is co-founder of this organization, a democratic-run, not-for-profit cooperative of movement organization and activist in the US and Mexico, and he'll share his story. Thank you, Alfredo.
Yeah, thank you, well, for us here in the United States, it's morning, so I'll say good morning, or good day to all of you throughout the universe. I want to explain briefly how we view governance in terms of what we do. I mean, we are essentially an internet organization of the left of the United States and Mexico. We are part of the left-wing movement in the United States and Mexico. We're a membership organization. We are democratically run. We are a cooperative legally. And with a full-fledged, various levels of types of membership, of co-op membership, and all the complexities that are involved there. But we are also involved in a lot of different movement activities. So we have a profile in at least a couple of the charts that a couple of the graphics that Mike was good enough to share with us in his highly informative presentation. So I want to just lay the foundation for that and explain a little bit about what governance means to us. It is not a normal situation. It's not a normal definition for either the internet or even to a large extent the cooperative movement or the alternative economy movements. And the first thing to understand as we view it is what actually is this thing called the internet, where we do our work. And the exercise that we frequently encourage people to do is to just sit and look at your computer and just try to think about what you see. What you essentially see is a box with a bunch of wires coming out of it, and nothing else. It's just this thing sitting on your desk, at your table, or wherever. It has no life. It has no importance. It has nothing. And even when you turn it on, all you're seeing is stuff that you wrote into it. It's when you hook it up to this vast network that it comes alive and becomes something. So for us, the internet is not the wire and computers that comprise its technology. It's the people who use it. And there are 3.2 billion people using it. That's the internet. That's what we work with. In order to move from that and to think about our work, given that terrain, we have to rethink the relationship around the question of tools. And that's partly what we're talking about here. We are, for example, using a major tool. This is an important tool, Big Blue Button. This tool is an alternative to many of the other web conference tools, corporate web conference tools that you're seeing out there, including Zoom. That appears to be a favorite to the level of a fetish of a lot of people all over the world. The question to understand when you're talking about these tools is, number one, not exclusively almost, this is the question. What's the relationship between the people who make the tool and the people who use it? Because keep in mind, the internet is the people who use it. So those people become critically important in our understanding of the governance of these tools. It's not only about the programmers and technologists, it's also about that mass of people who are using it. And our concept of governance at May 1st, Movement Technology, is to continuously develop the relationship between those two groups of people. That is what we're about, right? So in developing our governance structure, we start from the premise that there is no difference between technologists and movement activists. In fact, of the 900 members that we have, 500 of which are movement organizations. We also have individual members, but many are organizations. We have about 2,400 activists in our organization, in our tent, but it's all membership through organizations. The great majority, 99%, aren't technologists and are not concentrating exclusively on technology. They use it. And so that's what guides our organization, because we're democratically run. We are effectively a co-op whose decisions are made by the people who use what it is that we are offering as an organization. And so the governance becomes organic here. We do that governance through a series of not really fluid ways. I mean, we're still working on that constantly. But we do it through meetings, for example, online meetings. We have one a year for all our members. Our members elect a board. And then that board is seeped in an intentionality. Remember, we're not just talking about how to do technology. We're talking about movement work, movement activists who use technology. So the intentionality in the election of our board, where we clearly say to our members, you need to try to stress the presence of people of color and women in this board that's going to be running our organization in between member meetings, and they do. The great majority of our 25-person board is people of color, such as myself, or women. There are really only 2 white men in the 25 members that we have, and 5 of whom are from Mexico. So that governance, the intentionality of the governance, isn't rigidly imposed. It is implied through the constant educational work we do within our organization. And, why people of color and women? Because that's what runs the movement in the United States and in Mexico. In the United States, the predominant and most active leaderships of the movements for change are people of color. And in the United States primarily, but also to some extent Mexico, the leaderships of these movements are also women. And so we want to reflect that in our work, part of our governance. When we're thinking about governing our organization, we are thinking about the constituency that we represent and that we try to move into our organization. Why are we doing this? We're doing this in part because to make software more effective, to make our internet experience more effective, to make it more useful for our movement, so that the movement itself defines what we're going to be developing and how we develop it. And for example, in this whole web conference thing right now, there is an enormous fluid and constant discussion within our organization about how to improve web conferencing software. We also use Jitsi as another web conferencing alternative. How do you constantly develop that? There is that constant discussion. And it's important that our entire movement be involved in that discussion. Well, how do we do that? We have a big section of the movement in our membership. It's really simple. A lot of the leading organizations for social change in the United States are part of May 1st. So that's an important component. But the real main component, the main importance of it, is looking at the future. Because the reality is you can't change a society without thinking about what you would replace it with. And it is the replacement conversation that makes the internet the vital tool that it is. If you think about your mind, and I'll end with this, if you think about your mind, your brain, it's like the computer. Your brain's a relatively ugly organ sitting in your head. It doesn't do anything. But the moment it begins to interact, from the moment you're born, taking on knowledge of the rest of the human race, where there is no such thing as an original idea. All ideas, if you move back, are comprised of the thinking, the previous thinking, and the current thinking of the entire human race. That's what the internet brings to you. For the first time in history, we have a technology that can enable the thinking and development of the human mind as a global collaborative process. And that can provide the fundamental of the stuff, the material for imagining the future. So our governance, as should be all governance, is oriented toward allowing us to view the future and to develop it, because that in the end is what we're all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfredo. Thank you for that inspiration. Francesca, can I invite Francesca to comment, share her story? Francesca is a co-founder of Greater Than and an active member of WeShare and Inspiral. And she has been exploring, practicing new ways of working and governing organizations collaboratively. So, Francesca.
Yeah, hi. Hello, everyone. I'm running a timer, so I'll try to make sure to leave space for everybody. Yeah, so really great questions that you brought up there also, Mike, in your presentation before. The perspective that I'd like to share is, I guess, based on some of the key challenges or patterns that I've seen from a lot of the different international communities that I'm part of. We definitely, in most of those communities, the work we do is knowledge work. So a lot of it is a bit hard to sort of, explain really concretely and easily in terms of products we're selling or anything like that. But I guess to me, one of the most interesting things as I was thinking about governance in these international communities that I'm part of, like WeShare and Spiral, but there's also, Grace was here earlier from the DGov movement, and then there's also a couple others. It's really this question of stewardship and curation. So I think those are two really interesting areas. And if I specifically think about in the Inspiral network, one of the questions we've been asking ourselves all the time is what is good stewardship of our network in different moments. So in Inspiral, the way the structure works is that there's sort of two concentric circles. There's contributors and members. And so the members are the stewards. That's at least sort of formally speaking what the idea is. And I think something I've observed in Inspiral and also in some of these other groups I'm in is that over time, it seems like the stewardship groups get more and more comfortable. And I think that there's something about, even though they're dynamic roles, that when you stop fulfilling them, you're supposed to leave and shift out, and people do shift in and out. But there's something about holding that stewardship role over time that you get a certain level of comfort in that role, and that I think that the sort of act of stewarding sort of decreases over time, unless there's certain forces that are leading people to keep moving, and for sort of new stewardship energy to be coming in. And so I guess like what's quite interesting in Inspiral, and sort of an example I wanted to mention of how we've been dealing with this question of how to do curation is actually the concept of the catalyst. So that's a role that exists in Inspiral that we sort of fund through our membership contributions for people that are basically doing a cross-pollination between members and curating information. There's someone who makes videos every month to share updates. And that's something that all the groups that I'm in, we've struggled with so much, is basically how to deal with the information overload and actually be able to have a bit of an overview in these complex systems that are always changing. So I think looking at tools, I must personally say that in many cases, humans have been some of the best tools, or humans in connection with certain roles that we give them. Because if I think about in some of the decentralized autonomous organization circles, like around DGov, there's been lots of ideas around, oh, could we, automate, have some kind of system for this curation to be happening, to, share what's going on. And I'm sure one could develop interesting, I don't know, AI bots to do that or something. But I must say, I haven't seen very much yet beat like having a few humans basically just dedicating their time to sense into the system and to listen, to see what's happening, and to sort of use basically their body as the best sort of sensor to be able to figure out where to create connections and where to support the system. And so I guess one of the challenges I wanted to put out there is that even though in Inspiral we've managed to sort of get that role up and running and fairly funded, I've sort of seen systematically that it always gets deprioritized, very similarly to care work, because I think they're very related. That somehow paying people to do that role and really saying, yes, this is critical for the whole thing to keep going and for that commons to be maintained, somehow it often doesn't happen. And certain people that just care about it a lot end up doing it because they really want to, and then maybe they burn out. So I think that it's sort of like a real tension that I have, that we always say how important it is, but somehow it doesn't reflect in people's actions or decisions around where they choose to put their money. So yeah, I think even though I do a lot of work with Lumio and Co-Budget and all these tools, I really can't emphasize enough the importance of the practices that we develop as a group And I think that we still have a long way to go in improving those practices until we actually can even know what tools we really need to help that scale. So that's sort of why I guess I've been really focusing on that side. And yeah, I'll leave the floor to the next speakers.
Great, thank you, Francesca. That was great. I love the idea of this intentional carving out of a catalyst role. Now we have Petter Joelson. Petter is co-founder and co-director of nonprofit organization Digidem Lab, a lab for developing digital tools for democratic participation. Petter?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Petter Joelson, and I'm part of Digidem Lab, like you said, a lab for participatory democracy, and also Collective Tools, which is a platform cooperative for cloud services, and it's through Collective Tools that we've been involved in setting up this meet.coop cooperation. So just like short background about me, before working in Digidem Lab, I was in a cooperative web agency for like 8 years, and I've also been in social movements since like late 90s. So yeah, so I've got this different backgrounds that I've been trying to merge in Digidem Lab. The approach we've had in Digidem Lab has been to really experiment with digital tools and ways of participation for organizations and social movements in different forms, like in hackathons and in trying to bring together sort of social movement people with hackers and see where we can find like synergies and interesting things happening. And over 3 years, we did like 30 different projects where we sponsored young people to explore participation and digital tools for participation in different ways. And I think like this sort of experimental and also user-centered approach has given us a lot of insights and lots of good experiences. We realized that there are a lot of challenges in working with social movements and digital participation, and at the same time there was a lot of things happening around participation in cities around the world, like especially in Spain, where Barcelona and Madrid started doing like participatory budget processes for the whole city, and same thing in Paris and so on. And in Spain, like they've used open source software for this, like this one, Decidim from Barcelona, that we realized that yes, we can bring this to a Swedish context and to a local context, but also to combine it with methods for social inclusion in different ways, and like workshops and ways to reach those people who are sort of not normally involved in public processes. So a lot of what we do is like happens around these things now, and we do both participatory budgets for housing companies, especially in low income poor areas, and we work with municipalities for participatory budgets, with this combination of like online and offline methods. Like I said in the beginning, Collective Tools sort of came out of this experience with social movements, that we realized that like what most people in organizations need is much more baseline than like advanced democracy tools. They basically need like replacements for Google Drive and for maybe Slack and Trello if they're more advanced. And this is talking from a Swedish context. We're not like as advanced as some organizations in Barcelona or Taiwan, or where there's more of a sort of culture around these things and more sort of advanced forms of governance and participation. So Collective Tools is a platform cooperative where we provide Nextcloud and as alternative to Google Drive, and Rocket Chat as an alternative to Slack. And when you buy the service, you can become a member of the co-op and have influence over the running of it. My main focus has always been social movements, but I see a lot of challenges around that and a lot of things that I think needs to be discussed, and where we need to have a sort of experimental and user testing approach to working with these issues.
Thank you, Petter. I really enjoyed the kind of the city level kind of discussion that you're involved in. In my home city, Seoul City, is also kind of doing a lot on that, and I would love to talk to you later. But now I would like to invite Albert from the Business Network. Albert is involved in fair trade movement, community regeneration, and sustainable development, and is part of the Social Business and Ethico. Albert?
Yeah, hi. Just to say that, I mean, Ethico is the ethical trading organization that works globally largely with co-ops, where it's around using trade to change the power dynamics and the benefits from trade. If you think like a commodity like coffee, it's one of the most valuable commodities in the world, but most of the people who produce it are poor. How do you change that dynamic? And that's a cash opportunity, if you see what I mean. So if you have 2 hectares of coffee, for example, or sesame, you're not going to generate enough wealth to actually support the economy you're active in. So, or to invest in your local communities. If there's 1,000 of you, 200 of you, 500 of you, you have more of a chance. And you can also share resources, act collectively. But then you have to sell to the market, which is a global market, which is large enough to actually undermine each of you individually, buy from you individually and tell you different prices, undermine your capacity in the market, even when you produce the best quality product compared to the large, wealthy, international, global supported farmer running down the west and creating huge plantations to make it easy to sell cheaply. So working with those kind of competition, we have to work out how we compete. So part of what we work with co-ops with is about you with your 2 hectares, you have to get together with other farmers, create a process to do it. Many of you in the region, can we have a second tier? You all know about co-ops, so I won't bore you about it. So we've moved more into multi-stakeholder. Do we create, instead of all of you individually creating your trading operation, do we create one collectively, which actually acts for you in the market? And for this discussion, the governance challenges are legion, because we organize alternatively. With that structure I'm just describing, we call it the alternative multinational. So the trading company, or I call it the alternative multinational, the trading company is invested in by the co-ops, shareholders who agree with that, and the development organization we've created together. They own the profits of that trading company. But it's in the trading market. It has to function efficiently, has to respond to the markets. It has to know prices. It has to compete against some of the most ruthless traders in the world. And we have to organize to do that. We're working in different countries and different commodities. So we looked at this multi-stakeholder structure. So we have more say across the whole supply chain. And the governance of that often is housed individually. And that's where we found problems, but I'll come back to that. Then we also then have to say, how do we most efficiently respond so those guys don't come in and undercut, undermine, and subvert our membership? The buyers, who are the best buyers to enter us into the best markets? Because one of the challenges is the bits where the money comes in any chain often becomes the most powerful bit. So how do we change that dynamic, that equal value is given to all the elements from production to consumption and buying? And that's a global problem in the commodities we're working with and the products we're working with. Orlando Nunes in Nicaragua helped us to think about this a bit, and he's saying if you work with co-ops, regionalized co-ops, the profits and the dividends are more likely to be invested locally. And so we're very much now moving towards this thing about how do we create a multi-stakeholder agency that can do all of these things, but have a good governance structure in areas where our digital presence and platforms are very, very differential. How do we keep lean decision making so we can actually be effective? And how do we make sure what happens with co-ops often, if we were all open about it is when the membership grows, you have people who come in who don't totally buy into the approach or the platform you've built for working or the governance structures you've got. So the late Robin Murray helped us think about this, because one of his criticisms of us in the ethical trade and global economy and social economy was we've been quite rigorous about the social, we've been quite rigorous about the production and even the consumption at some stages, but we haven't been rigorous about organizing ourselves as ruthlessly as the others have. We haven't organized sufficiently rigorously, and that's therefore our structures often are easily undermined. And this is what we're grappling with. So one of the things that are happening with ethical businesses and cooperatives in the market side, in the retail side, of the wealthier side of the market, of the chain, is that as they grow and the founders become older and they need a pension and they need to exit, they need to generate investment to do that. And that's when the big guys come in, take it over. And if you think I'm exaggerating and I'm only talking about the small guys, think Body Shop, think Whole Food Markets, think all of those who had ethical intentions, taken over by the big guys who keep it there where it was. So its ability to then grow and take over the market, which was our idea, becomes more limited. And so how do we work in those ways together? So how do all of us who are in co-ops, how do we support each other's businesses? What governance structures give us the capacity to be a global movement that works together to undermine the systems we think are not good for us and the communities we work with? And do digital tools help us with that? Do the construction of digital tools help us with that? I'm also talking concepts. So one of the Google Academy guy I talked to about some of this I work with, he described the concept of agile creativity to me. Now, to me, this is a whole new concept. Those of you working in app production and all of that understand this. And I think, which is that thing about you're constantly, it's never perfect, it's never evolved, but you're constantly, by learning, creating the next step and working towards the perfect tools. So those are the things we're grappling with. And I don't want to propose any solutions. We've tried lots of different solutions, including marketing, going to the market and saying, we want you to acknowledge the unpaid work of women in the supply chain for a couple of reasons. And that created huge headaches for us, because although people understand the principles, actually doing it was a problem. We created it, but again, we also did something people criticized. We didn't actually have it that the individual amount goes to individual women farmers who produce. What we did was get the cooperative to create an enterprise board where that money went into. So people will have a good chunk to create local enterprises that met local needs. And that's working slowly, but we're having a hard job, except when we disguise it and people don't notice until it's already in the production cost of production, that we're having a hard job having it accepted as part of the price. And we like to work transparently. So it's kind of how the digital can help us with some of these conundrums so we can apply them. Somebody asked the question, how do the developers of these tools or these relate to the people who can use them? And that's the real interest I have in the conversations I've heard here and the models that I've heard talked about here. Sorry, I took a bit longer than I thought.
Nice. Thank you, Albert. Now I would like to invite Wouter to give a response.
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, I would like to thank all of you, and especially the OpenCoop team, for taking the risky challenge to run this conference on the meet.coop servers. I mean, this is the first public event that we've been doing on this server. So big applause, big applause. This is really great, amazing. I mean, you imagine that by the end of April, the organizations that started this had been setting up their Jitsi servers like Petter and Collective Tools, and we had Fempo and others, right? So we were not completely happy with those solutions, especially if your server is not powerful enough. And Big Blue Button was obviously the best tool available in the free software digital commons world. So when Petter came to us and said, hey, maybe we could share such a server, and by the end of April, we said, hey, this is something we should consider. So we opened up a decision vote on our Lumio group for Fempo Commons, and the same did Collective Tools, and the same did Web Architects in the UK. So then we joined together at the 6th of May at the first formal meeting, where our General Assemblies had decided to contribute to share a server, a big blue button. But then why not share this with more people and more organizations? We don't want to do this alone, and this is a big server. It would not be used too much, right? So rather extend the invitation and make this a platform, cooperative kind of initiative, or whatever it would be, at least abiding by the cooperative principles, right? So that's what we did, and we said, well, we could call it meet.coop. We don't think of animal meat, please. But the online meeting cooperative as a starting working title, and then so we started. So that gives a little bit of an understanding how we're currently trying to solve and work out these issues that you bring up. So very brief note about where I come from. Well, not about myself, but about the cooperative. Fempo Comuns means we make commons in Catalan. We started this formally in 2017, and in the first, in the 2018 Open Coop conference in London, we presented several of our projects. We're a multi-stakeholder cooperative with workers, collaborator members, and consumer members. And so far so good. Challenging, of course, but we have some more challenge, which is that we work with cooperativized groups of activity. We call them GACs in Catalan. GAC is like a cooperative business unit within the cooperative. One is the Teixidora, at the bottom left, where people collectively document online or public events. Another one is the Open Internet of Things network in the center at the bottom, CHOIC. It's in the area of the Things network globally. And we have the commonscloud.coop, which is similar to what Collective Tools works on. And we have the Comunificadora, which is, we have a transition group which helps with workshops and programs for the collaborative commons economy, for the city of Barcelona, and these kind of things. All of this is greatly inspired by the three traditions that Mike so nicely introduced. Digital commons, free and open source, free libre open source software, the cooperativism in its different variations, and grassroots, the 15 May movement. We started this, we came together with three key objectives, right? First was sharing this online meeting service, but we also had a larger objective to work together more closely with other like-minded actors, and that's what Ollie started in 2018, bringing us together with web architects, etc., in London, and we wanted to make this more concrete. Who are we now? Formally committed members, because so far meet.coop, the online meeting cooperative, is a membership platform where people individually and as organizations can join in to contribute and make this happen together. So we distinguish so far three types of members. The three in the center are Fempo Comuns, Collective Tools, and Web Architects, who are the organizations who've taken legal and financial responsibility for this. And possibly Haifa from Toronto is joining in that center as well, maybe together with Conebit, who's hosting this server in Quebec. And then we have a second circle or oval, which are the producer members. And those are organizations who maybe contribute financially, but also with time and resources to work on this together. And then there are organizations who are just between brackets, very importantly, our consumer members want to contribute financially and make use of the services. Well, so this gives also already two dimensions of challenges. Like we have three types of members, but then there can be some of them can be individually or organizationally. So the second great the second level copes that was mentioned, I think first in the chat, is very interesting. I think we should explore that. But then there, the challenge of how do individuals become part of that is an interesting one. So far we work with the existing legal entities that we together all have. Just to give you a quick view of the roadmap, in May we worked on the proof of concept stage. We automated deployment of servers, very important. So last week we had the first server live, which we're running on now, and major milestone is this conference. So we see how it works and what we can do for other events. Then the next level will be, next milestone will be in September, beta, where we have several nodes. Our vision is decentralized in various ways, and that's also challenging. So the question here is, can we handle this until when to work with the existing legal entities, and when would we really need to have what kind of governance model with the existing entities or another organization parallel on top of it. There is have been said so many things. I liked as well what Francesca said about the catalyst on spiral, cross-pollination. I think that's really important. What Alfredo said, the relationship with people with the tool is really, really important. And yeah, Albert mentioned the scale, of course. I think it's the sector is quite different, the digital sector, digital tools, but the scale is obviously challenging. I mean, we have these huge digital oligopolists which control so large part of our life and our society. So this is really, really, really big challenge to scale and work with a positive alternative to that.
Great. Thank you, Wouter. Thank you, Wouter, and all the speakers for kind of providing live examples of kind of this diversity of governance in movement.
Thank you, and thank you everyone there. It was really interesting and great to hear all of your experiences.
This slide is posed a little bit cynically, maybe. This is a consumer question. This is not a strategy question for meet.coop. Yeah, I'm asking you, individual person, as a user of an infrastructure of digital tools provided as a web platform, which of these, A, B, or C, would you prefer, or actually would you gravitate to? So option A is like free beer, yeah, a food bank. It's what you can get any day of the week by just browsing on the internet somewhere. So that's A. Option B is, would you actually like to be served by a cooperative utility, and get a nice warm ethical glow out of that? Yeah? Or would you really be up for contributing in a commons where there is ceaseless care work? This really has to be woven together. You really have to contribute if it really is going to be a commons. And I suppose the bottom line is all you really want for the water to come out when you turn the tap on.
Now, there seems to be a lot of people voting for the commons structure there, even regardless of what Mike has said about that requiring an awful lot of care work. Some people happy to be served by a co-op utility in the middle, and then possibly a few people preferring a free beer food bank model over there on the left. I think it's important to recognize, that what needs to happen here, what we're talking about with this blue line around the edge of all of these examples, is in fact a kind of membrane, right? It's the membrane which defines what is inside and what is outside this organization that we're calling meet.coop, and who is actually inside and who's outside, what it means for you to come inside, what are the commitments that you are making. In the commons model, clearly what Mike's saying is that everybody is going to be part of this. It's going to be a steward, and we will all have a collective responsibility for stewarding that commons. If maybe it's B, and it's more of a setup where you're being served, then presumably you could be on the outside and just be a customer and be able to pay your money, walk away, do nothing else, and have no involvement. You just be a customer of what is set up essentially as a workers' co-op. That kind of changes the dynamics of the relationship and is perhaps not the model that we want to follow. And then A is obviously even more direct than that. It kind of leaves the gates open, to my mind, in terms of potential for people to perhaps, use the service without contributing anything in terms of time or resources or care work. I spoke to Peter about this a little bit, and in some ways I sort of prefer some sort of synergy of model between B and C here, which would perhaps try and redefine the relationships between what is a collective entity that everybody can use and what is just a complete general commons. So you could imagine possibly there might be a model whereby you could say you do have to contribute something in order to participate and be a part of this co-op and get the use of all the services. But rather than just saying the standard sort of web startup model where it's, an individual account is X, say €5, a month or a year or whatever it is, and then a business account is a bit more and a bit more services a bit more. Perhaps there's tiers, but perhaps those tiers don't actually have direct financial values ascribed to them in order to make it more inclusive. So you try and move towards the position where you're asking people to contribute what they think is a fair contribution, as long as they make some sort of contribution. To me, those are the kind of tough decisions that need to be made in order to ensure the long-term sustainability and viability of meet.coop. Wouter and Petter, I'd be interested in your feedback on that and how you see this evolving, and then maybe we can hear from the others on the panel as to how they think that could work.
I didn't show you the other slide where we are drafting a proposal for the levels of contributions. And here's one thing. We can have services that are free services that everybody can use without registering or without being a formal contributor or member of the cooperative. So for example, we could say that everybody can host his or her own room for a limited duration and maybe not with very powerful recording capacities, but still they can organize their own rooms. And if they want more powerful features, then we could require some level of contribution. But then still, we will have to deal with the differences, inequalities in the world between the North and the Global South. So there, the decentralized model that we're trying to pursue is also of interest. I think that if there are servers in Latin America, they can have different levels of contribution to be sustainable in their territory, or in India, what would be different in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, like one perspective that I'm trying to remind myself of is like I'm, although like I'm a person who's really into and interested in digital tools, most people don't want to think about this stuff at all. Like they just want to use something and they want to spend their time organizing protests or direct actions or like housing cooperatives or whatever. And I think that's fine. I think we as like tech people organize ourselves to just like provide a service, but like it's still good to have the feedback from our users and to give them some kind of ownership. So that's also why I'm in between these models B and C, and like sometimes gravitating towards B. When it comes to meet.coop, we'll see where it goes. But that's my sort of general perspective.
So, should I hand back over to you? I'm sure Francesca's got a point to make too, but you've played a great chair role, and I'm sure that you probably have an opinion on this too. So I'm interested to hear what you think.
I think like I was reading through Renata's comment, and kind of as a person who's not kind of involved in the kind of the design of the tools, like as users, sometimes I think there's so many projects that could be involved, like if there could be different levels of involvement in terms of, but kind of having the option of just being a kind of just a user and paying kind of subscription type of thing would work better for someone who's kind of in the field, I think.
My personal preference with these kind of things is to somehow try to design for a diversity of contributions, profiles, situations, because I think that like if we constrain it too much, then we're sort of I guess losing the potential of ways that people could contribute. And as we were just saying, I think while I totally think that the C model is really valuable and important, I think it's hard to imagine being in too many like organizations or systems where you have to put in all that care work and all that, like that's a lot. And so I think we need to be realistic about how much of it can we do, and where is it maybe good to just pay for it or offer something. Maybe we were discussing here about other resources like computing power or things that we have easily available. And I think one of my experiences in a lot of the communities I've been in is that it's always really hard to grapple with the fact that each person has a very personal way of contributing often, and they can be as diverse as the different human beings that are there. And so there's not always like a perfect model for how you can be bringing in what it is you have. And so how can we offer that spectrum somehow? Without, of course, getting too complicated and making things unclear, which is, of course, the other drawback.
I totally agree with that. And I think also, depending on where you are in this, how global it is and which kind of, how much diversity you have in the membership, actually, there are many people who would strongly support, say, Model 3. But when you're struggling to survive, you're battling the elements, you're battling whatever, you can't commit that time. How many times most of us, like something like this thing, I'd love to contribute, I'd love to learn from it, but I've got to do 3 Zoom calls in a minute, so I won't be on it. That disqualifies you, because these are people who are potentially great supporters of it. If we make it easy for people to be in, they may be in just turning the tap on and making it work. We did some work on digital inclusion with Carnegie Trust in here and in the US. And most people, the reason why they bypass their concerns about being pried upon and recorded and stuff like that is because it's easier and they have access to more things, but they don't like it. So it's kind of, let's make it easier for people to move from that bottom question, just turn the tap on and it comes on, into that last one. Because there'll be different times in one's life experiences where it's possible to do one or the other. So I encourage people to buy coffee as a way of contributing. You know, I own up, they buy coffee, why not? But also, I would love them to be more actively involved and make sure they only got it from the particular areas they're interested in and all of that. But start with saying, okay, put your hand up, join, make use, give us a footprint, and then slowly suck them into be more involved. That's what the charity sector does with all of us when we give our time free. They tell you it's going to be 1 hour a month, and it slowly becomes more and more and more. So I think that's how we've got to do these things.
There's a good question from Robert Best in the chat there. I just wanted to clarify with Petter and Woto, which is asking, what is the nature of the relationship between meet.coop and the team that develops Big Blue Button? I think Big Blue Button is just an open source piece of software that we're using here, and there is no relationship otherwise. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is some relationship. It was brought up on several meetings. So I wrote an email to the founder or the project coordinator, Fred Dixon, from Big Blue Button and Blind Networks, the company that he runs. We didn't get any reply on that yet, but we are now developing several automation scripts, and we're getting towards some of the challenges of the system. So we have some suggestions and some requests. So we are in the process of engaging with the developer community there. So yeah, we expect to have more news on that in the coming weeks, hopefully.
Somebody mentioned earlier that the techies kind of become the essential tent poles in this whole thing, which was kind of interesting expression, but I understand entirely what they mean. And I suggested there that maybe one solution would be that meet.coop should think about paying them really well, because if it wasn't for Walter and Chris and Peter and some of the people that have come together behind this, like, this wouldn't have happened, right? They are essential. Like, maybe we can chip in with our computing resources, and yeah, it'd be nice to see this all being distributed and done over Holochain and everybody being able to contribute their laptop when it wasn't being used. But without that tech experience in the middle, then it's not going to happen. So clearly they need recognition and they need looking after. And paying them really handsomely would be one way to try and achieve that. But that's the old kind of neoliberalist capitalist idea. And Susanna's point there is that care work, you know, shouldn't be taken for granted. And how can it be fairly compensated for and valued through means other than fiat money? Like, you know, maybe it isn't enough that we just say, oh, well, we're paying Chris and we're paying Walter, you know, come on, why doesn't the server work? Like, if we just do that, they're going to get burnt out and they're going to need looking after. So how do we do that?
This isn't an answer, but it's a pointer. Read the Disco Manifesto about care work. You know, I mean, that's one of the best discussions that I know of care work and how you actually run it in an actual organisation.
Yeah, the thing is, if I may, Oliver, the problem is that there are two different types of functions here that in this society are separated, which is what might be called production and consumption, which techies doing the production, everyone else consuming. And we've got to move to a point in society where those differences and separations collapse culturally, so that people are communicating back and forth. What do you need? What are the limitations? How do I do this work, etc.? And also that techies are able to contribute. I mean, we're in the political movement, so techies are able to contribute their thinking and ideas to how to do demonstrations. I'll give you an example. The purpose of conferences is so you get together personally and physically and talk to each other and have informal conversations, which can't be replicated online. So what's the importance of having 200 or 300 people online in a convergence like that? Why not have smaller groups or something like that, or work out some type of arrangement culturally that I'm not capable of doing? That's the kind of collaborative thinking that I think would substitute for higher payment, because you're absolutely on point. Techies don't get no higher payment, not never.
Especially not if you're an ethical techie. No, you're not going to be rich.
I've done web development for maybe 20 years, and it's really like what I'm trying to do now is mostly just reuse, automate, and do as little original coding as possible, because it's fucking time consuming and expensive. And like if we can, and I really see like a potential in doing this kind of coordination on a global scale, where we put together our resources on a more global scale, to really like do as little development as possible. And I'd like to see sort of more of that, like reusing things on a really big scale and federate them, and like just see that we focus on like automation, easy user interfaces and things like that.
Can I just reflect back to the point I made about supply chains? There is a question for us: how do we value everybody in the chain of from production to consumption, as you put it, Alfonso? Because it's how do we allocate value? Whether it be care or production or sales, how do we allocate that value? Because there is an intrinsic value we work with. The people who sell the most are the most powerful one in the chain. There's a rather interesting joke a colleague of mine likes telling about the parts of the body we're arguing about, which is the most important. And the brain says, well, it has to be me. If I don't think, nothing happened. The eye says, well, no. The mouth says, you know, and goes on and goes on. And the bottom says, well, what about me? And the rest of them laugh. And the bottom goes on strike. And within 2 days, they're begging the bottom to actually come off strike so that they can function. So I think that there is a question about allocating value on all of these things. You know, you can create the most wonderful thing. If it's not used, if we don't find a way to use it and make it vital, it has little value. And so I think we need to look at that whole, the social economy, I suppose, in terms of the digital. And then how do we allocate value? What is valuable in that chain? We've just seen in COVID, the people, the low-paid people, the people they didn't want to pay and all of that are the very ones who depend on just to survive. So, but that's not what we allocate value to in those chains. So I think when we're thinking of, well, what do the techies get out of it? So does the consumer get? Then I think we need to look at the whole thing and think, how do we allocate value to each of those players? And that's the thing we are struggling with in practice when we talk about trade, and how that works with the cooperatives, the collective, and the governance and all of that, is what is value, what is relative value?
Absolutely. I think that's an awesome place to stop. I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And we heard yesterday about, the way that the user need actually drove this process. Meet.coop probably wouldn't have sprung up so effectively if COVID hadn't come along, driven everybody online and created a real user need for the alternative to a proprietary closed source tool. So that's great. Here we are. That user need has coalesced us together, and that's brilliant. What we need to do now is build on that. And I really think we've had some excellent input here, and hopefully this will go some way towards informing the process as the governance for meet.coop evolves. I think I'm right in saying, Wouter and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, that actually everybody is welcome to be involved in that process, and if they want to do so, they can go to the forum and sign up to become some sort of member of meet.coop.
Yeah, do write us as well if you want to join as members. And if you have some time, join us in the Thursday weekly meetings. That would be really great.
Thank you to So for chairing us there and for your thoughts, Albert and Alfredo, Francesca, Mike, Peter and Wouter. That was brilliant.